Good morning. I'm Mark Fowler. I'm the president of Stowe Management Corporation and the CEO of Revolutionary Conversations, which is a training communications company. And Stowe Management Corporation is a business reengineering and consulting firm for helping companies go from where they are to where they need to be. Last year, we initiated and launched a podcast called Always Creating Value. And in our businesses, both businesses, one of our main focus points has always been, despite where the company is or where the people are, focusing on where they're creating value and how can we create more value, and in particular, on a fairly consistent basis so that they can continue on and be better every day. In these podcasts, we've been able to tap into some very special people and be able to talk to them about the kinds of things that they've done over their life that not only affected their business, but also their personal life. And I've brought back 3 of the people who have been podcast participants, and they're all within the business and or corporate world in different ways. And with them, they're all women, and we want to reach back to the days of the 70s and 80s when women were only beginning to really have a major impact on the business world. Before the 70s and such, you didn't find women at senior positions, and all of a sudden in the 70s and 80s, and then as the 90s went on, they became more and more involved and began to change the culture. And we would like to tap into the risks and the challenges that they've had to deal with, the situations that they've had to deal with, and get a contextualization about how some of this really good experience can be applied to the challenges that we have today, the DEI issues, the more people coming into the workplace wanting to grow and be part of it, want to be part of the business, be part of the business world in a whole new way. And I'd like to introduce them. Ann Hofferberth. Ann comes from the public and corporate world. Lynn Kitchen, she comes from the wealth management, and now she's in the business of producing television episodes, and she's now started nationally. Now she's going across the world. And Devin Blaine. Devin is a public relations person focused in the area of business and the political. She also focuses in the business perspective from a crisis management platform where she's been able to help companies with their PR as they go through some very dangerous times. Lynn, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your area of value creation, and in particular, all those years ago when you were starting out.
Yes, thank you so much, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with all of your guests. I'm excited because this is a topic near and dear to my heart. The topic of diversity for women is an ongoing growth issue. And it's so wonderful that you are inviting those of us who were at an earlier era to just talk about some of the experiences that we had that were the underpinnings for some of the growth that we're seeing today. So I'm really very excited to be here. Thank you, Mark. I also wanted to acknowledge I loved being on your podcast before, which was Always Creating Value. That's one of the topics that, is if we can always create value, not only in our corporations, but in our personal lives and in our everything that we believe in and everything that we hold dear, then I think that we're on the path to being better humans. And in that regard, let me just say that as I started out in business, in the corporate world, I jumped in with absolute, my eyes closed and, holding my nose and just jumping into the end part of the pool, the deep end. And let me just give you a little background that I was a product of the 1970s Vietnam era college days, in which the latter part of my college was war protests on campus and a lot of disruption and unrest, not too different than we have seen in the last few years, although it took a different messaging. But that was a part of my value system that I chose a different path at that time. I actually, it made me become an entrepreneur. I was unhappy with the way people were discounting and making the corporations seem like they're the bad guys. And I thought, wait a minute, we create value, we create jobs. Let's go make some money together. Let's have some fun. So I went out all over the country and sold things door to door, sold books door to door, sold programs school to school, sold advertising store to store. And I learned early on that I could become self-sufficient. Once I did get through college, the one thing that I learned at that point is that I still was broke. As a broke student, what do I do now? But I did have one thing. I learned how to sell. I could stand on my feet and sell anything that I put my mind to. So I went into the area of money management in particular, and in the stock market. And I wanted to not only learn how to make money, but I wanted to learn the language of money. And I said to myself, if I ever do make some money, I want to learn how to manage it for myself and my family. So that was my values underpinnings. Right out of college, I just was knocking on doors to see if I could get a job as a stockbroker. And interestingly enough, it was a shock because at that time, women were not allowed to become a stockbroker right out of college unless you put in at least 10 years of good, hard work as a secretary to a stockbroker. So it was very, very unusual. And I just kept knocking on doors all the way down Wilshire Boulevard. And I know Devin lives here in Los Angeles, so you know that Wilshire Boulevard was a street that went from downtown Los Angeles all the way to Santa Monica. And on that street were hundreds of stock brokerage companies. Mm. Yes, like, Merrill Lynch and Dean Witter and all of the big ones, Payne Weber, and they had, ticker tape places you could just walk in. And I did walk in and knocked on the door. Fortunately, I found one gentleman, a manager, who said that he would give me a shot. He would give me a chance. He would give me an opening because I obviously was selling myself so heartily. And he said it was because he had 3 daughters of his own. And he wanted someday for the corporate world to give them a break. So he was going to give me a break, but he wanted me to really understand that he was putting his career on the line by doing so, and that he had to put me on probation, and that meant that I had higher threshold of sales that I had to, come up and I thought, I'm great. I'm in. So my attitude was not like, oh, how dare they treat me that way, which is different than today. I wanted to make the point that we are, wherever we begin, those are the values of the day. I do understand today's values have shifted and changed. But back then, I was so excited just to get my foot in the door. After the first 4 years of working for a major brokerage firm, Dean Witter Reynolds, I had done everything that I could to excel, and I did excel. And I had an idea that I could actually create my own brokerage firm. And so I left the majors and became an independent broker-dealer. I was one of the first women on the West Coast to do so. There were several, not many, but a handful of women-owned broker dealerships, sprinkled around the country, a few more in New York City, of course, with Wall Street being the financial center of America. But most people said, you are crazy. You are crazy. If you don't have the big corporations behind you and all of their research staff, you will fail. And I said, well, let's see what happens. What have I got to lose? Let's see what comes of it. And so I was pleased to say that most of the men who were at higher levels of authority, who could have kept me small or kept me out of a possible moving forward, they welcomed a woman moving into that arena. And I just want to share that my experience was that men opened the door as well during the beginning years. And I want the women of today to really understand that. So it's not an us versus them. We were welcomed. And we were, I think, well respected for taking the responsibility to maybe be the first. So it's been great. I'm an advocate of always being better, not bitter.
I have a sense that, and today a little bit of that bitter kind of filters through what's going on, that we haven't exceeded enough, that we haven't been actually getting better. I don't know how to relate to that. I just the things I hear about the challenges that women and other cultures have in dealing with this. I think a bit of bitterness exists, maybe because they don't understand how much has been accomplished. What do you think?
Well, I think, thank you for that question. It's important to really understand the history of what has been accomplished. My goodness, looking back now, I succeeded 34 years. It was a 34-year career in the investment management. And I went on from having my own broker-dealer to starting another investment advisor after that. It's a full career of in what they determine as a male-dominated industry, many of which women have now succeeded tremendously. But there was an era in which we had to make sure that we could prove our value, and bring to the table something of credible value that would contribute to the ongoing benefit of the industry that we were representing, and why not? So I think that you're right. It's important for young women today to really understand the history and what happened before them, and because that brings a level of appreciation to everyone involved.
Let's go back a little bit to the area of selling encyclopedias. Maybe that's not what you sold, but back to the being on the street, so to speak, and trying to figure out what you could sell and how you could sell. What gave you the gumption, the chutzpah to do this?
Well, I think I was maybe unique in that. Well, first of all, I was broke. That's a good. Starving college students, even though that my parents, it just happened to be at the time of their life that they couldn't put me through college. So I decided to put myself through. And so I needed some extra income. And it was an opportunity for me to get away from my hometown, little hometown, and see the world. So knocking on doors was exciting to me. It wasn't encyclopedias, but it was Webster's dictionaries. It's pretty close.
Well, thank you very much. We'll be coming back and talking with all three of you. But thank you, Lynn. Ann Offerberth, You've been the president of several public companies. What can we learn from you about the corporate world here? We've learned about the wealth management world.
Well, thank you, Mark. And I'm really excited about being on this with these outstanding women and sharing what we've learned with those who listen. But I don't know if I ever really told you, Mark, that I actually started my career when I was 5. My business career when I was 5 years old. I was working in my mother and father's restaurant, and I would give change to people with this little tiny hand would come up with their quarter. I was the daughter of 2 people that came to the United States from Ireland. And so working and education, as in many first-generation families, was very important. So when I finished my college career, I embarked into the corporate business world. And I started with Casual Corner. And when I was looking about, it was at that time that Lynn was referencing when women were suddenly moving out into the business world. And I saw something that I thought could be an interesting concept. And I developed what was called the wardrobe. And I put together 2 suits, 5 tops, 1 bottom. Those pieces could become a 30-day wardrobe. And I traveled around New England, much like Lynn, and taught other stores how to sell this concept to women emerging into a professional life. Believe it or not, at that time, we weren't even ready to know how to dress for the job we wanted, let alone getting that job. It ended up catapulting that career, and I grew up through the ranks at Casual Corner. And at the end, I decided I would move out of retailing into manufacturing, and I joined Vanity Fair Corporation, and I was the first president of a division for Vanity Fair, and that had its unique interests. And from there, I went on to become the president of retail for Hallmark, and that was my corporate environment. And FTD, where I was president of the marketplace with the 20,000 florists, kind of merged entrepreneurs and corporate together, because I was working directly with the entrepreneurs who are running and helping them run their businesses as well as buy product. But what was very interesting in my time, there were ads on TV about women bringing home the bacon and frying it in the pan. That was the big commercial. And it said we were supposed to be Wonder Woman. We were supposed to do it all. We were supposed to go out there, earn the bacon, and then fry it up in the pan. And as I looked around in my corporate environment, I saw that that's not what the men were doing. The men weren't trying to do it all. The men were finding people who were better equipped to do a job than they, or possibly better at doing a job they didn't want to do, and hiring them. They weren't this do-it-all concept. And I quickly noticed that might be what was holding some of my female counterparts back, because when you try to do it all, you get exhausted. So I took that learning and adapted the idea of delegation and finding the right people to do the right jobs, and then staying on top of them and overseeing that performance and making sure that they knew what the goal was and that we would get there. And it also translated back into my home life, because for me to be able to do what I was doing now that I had a husband and 2 children meant that I needed to delegate some of that too. And my terrific husband was willing to take on the role of being a very early, what's called stay-at-home dad. And not many guys were doing it, but he was an early adapter, and he did it. And I was smart enough to let him do it the way he wanted to do it, not impose my way of doing it, and just wear the pink underwear. Eventually, he was going to figure out how to do the laundry and separate the colors. And he did. And now he does laundry better than I. But not only did I delegate at work, I delegated at home. And I even took it a little step further, Mark. I have 2 sons. And I convinced them that when they got to be a double-digit person, they were allowed to have a double-digit bike. That was a big thing, to have a 10-speed bike, and their own laundry baskets. They couldn't wait. And that is what I learned. I learned to delegate.
can we go back to the restaurant? I mean, I imagine you grew quite a bit from the 5-year-old and making change, but what kind of skills did you pick up in that? I guess the restaurant's still around, isn't it? It's been 90 years or something like that.
Yes, my dad passed when I was 3, and I was the youngest of 5. So now my mother from Ireland had to take over and make this work. And she really took it to the next level. And we all knew what it was to work. We knew what it was to take care of ourselves, and we knew what it was to support the person who was working. So we became a very close unit. But I learned, honestly, Mark, at 5 and 6, it was a cash business. It was a hot dog stand. And the money would come, Mom would give it to me, and on Sunday morning, I would sit on the floor with all the 20s and the 10s and the 5s and count out the money and put it in the right wrappers and take it to the bank. And 5, 6, 7, all the way until I went on to college, that was my job, to take care of the accounting. But nothing made me prouder. I was like the puppy at Starbucks that gets the puppy cappuccino. When we go to the bank and they count the money and there were no errors, I was thrilled. That just made my day. So I had to learn how to cope with not having a mom who was going to get up and get me dressed in the morning because she'd worked late, and also understand that she needed help in her enterprise as much as I needed her in mine.
Wow. Just one more question. We'll move to Devin. But I listened to both you and Lynn, and there's in both of you there is this ability to grab a hold of the situation and move it forward, knowing that you're going to succeed. I mean, even though you might have doubts, it doesn't stop you. And I mean, where does that come from? I mean, is it because you had a great, family life, even though you had lost your dad, but the business also, was a big part of that. You met lots of people, and you were probably adorable, and everybody who came there, cared about you. So, but where did you get that drive? It was just watching your mom, or what is it? Because a lot of people don't have jobs nowadays when they go to college. They, I was so glad that I started working at 15 because when, I worked all the way through college. And when I went to get a job, I knew I was on my way to be a CPA and meeting clients. I'd already met so many customers in life. I knew how to talk to somebody, but a lot of people don't know how to talk to people. So.
No, I think you hit the nose right on the head. It was definitely my mom. Watching my mother at the worst moment gather herself and her 5 children and motor forward was, number one, a very good example. If I can tell you a little story about the training that I got, I can remember at 14, an 18-year-old asked me on a date. And I was the youngest of the 5. So I went to my mother and I asked her if I could go on this date. And she said, sure. And I thought, oh, wow, she's getting easy with the youngest one. She was much stricter. I thought, great. So it was about an hour later, Mark. She came to me and she said, I want to ask you a question. In this country, now I knew I was in trouble when that came up, don't you have to be 16 to drive a car? And I said, yes. And she said, so you want to give up all your control, all your independence, and get into a car that you can't take over yourself and run yourself and to go on this date. She never said no. She just said, you're going to give up all your power and not be in control. Wow. So I didn't go on the date. But boy, did I learn a lesson. And when someone asked me why I didn't go on the date, my answer was, why would I get in a car I couldn't drive? And so she gave me out of it. She got me out of it and gave me an out. So she really was an incredible mentor. And I earned money. I learned early how nice it was to have my own money. And as a grown woman, when I was looking for, I never wanted to marry. I never needed to marry. I wasn't really looking for a partner because I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. But when I found Don, I really found a partner. And I think that makes a big difference in women today. They're looking for someone to take care of them. I want to take care of myself and then look for someone who wanted to share that with me. And that all, I think, came from my mom, my 4 brothers and sisters, and just a good outlook on the best way to get through it is to motor on.
Keep going. Well, let's motor on a little bit. Let's bring on Devin, who I think she's mentioned in our previous podcast that she's not risk adverse. She doesn't mind jumping right in there and shaking things up, probably all the time. Devin, a little bit about you and your creating value.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back with you and such a joy to share this time with Lynn and with Anne. I did many, many years ago take a test on risk adversity. And it was an entrepreneur's test. And I've sadly never had the benefit of any of the corporate background that both Lynn and Anne have had. And sometimes I wish I had, because I would have learned a lot from that. But that test told me that I was absolutely zero risk adverse, that I would risk 100% of everything to go after what I believed. And sadly, a few of the important men in my life realized that too and made their exit because of it. But it's always worked for me. Yes, I've had some terrible failures, but no one who's succeeded hasn't had failure. And it's also why I've accomplished some of the things I've accomplished. So I'm a great believer in not being fearful of not knowing the outcome.
Could we, talking about that, you're always reaching out. Public relations, almost every day is a different situation with the same client. It's a very dynamic. You just never know what they're going to do tomorrow that you have to, course correct on the next day. Can you give us some highlights about what you do?
We ask a lot, and we hear no a lot. One of my all-time favorite clients was the head of a nonprofit organization, and of course was always asking for corporate donations. And his favorite saying was, "It's not like I haven't heard no before." And that's our job when it comes to the press. We probably ask several hundred people in the press on a daily basis about covering a client. If we hear yes once or twice a day, it's a fabulous day.
Kind of like back to Lynn when she was selling her Webster's dictionaries, right?
Or going up and down Wilshire Boulevard asking to join a brokerage. And yes, you're going to hear no a whole lot. And so what? It's the yeses that count. And sometimes the yeses come from people that make more of a difference to the client with that coverage.
Sometimes I would imagine that there are situations where you don't want the yes. You don't know what you don't know.
We have had that situation in some crises, Mark, and you spoke of our crisis work a moment ago. Yes, there are times when we absolutely don't want press coverage. And I've had a major national network call and say, unless you can provide us with a spokesperson from the company, we're not going to cover this. And I would say, I am so sorry. We just don't have anyone available. And behind the scenes, I'm saying, yes, that's exactly what I want. And I always take those calls personally because my team is so accustomed to pushing to get yes. It's kind of a major jump shift for them to be able to accept the no.
Now, you've had your own challenges coming up in the business world. I mean, you didn't have to navigate a corporate organization or navigate, the securities exchange dynamics and things that go on that there's regulations. Not that you don't have to mind your P's and Q's, but you came up in a different way. You kind of learned along the way. Some of it by yourself, right?
I did learn along the way because I started a public relations agency, having never worked for an agency. I had worked with a lot of PR people, a lot of VPs of corporate communications, a lot of advertising managers, a lot of CFOs, because I started as an actress and a model. I worked every trade show known to mankind. You name the industry, I did a trade show. So I came to the agency world with just enough knowledge of every industry, except for the brand new ones, to get myself in trouble in a meeting. I could talk a few buzzwords. I knew a little bit. Maybe enough, probably not. But I could talk the game. And trade shows, I got so bored because I was the cute young girl in the booth wearing hot pants or a mini skirt, 4-inch spike heels or knee-high boots, saying, "How about a bag today, sir?" And that would get real boring. So every break, lunch, coffee, I made it a point to walk around the conference, see what was new in that industry, talk to people, learn everything I could possibly learn. And it also ensured I got hired the next time.
Because you were able to reach out. It was, again, there's that no worry about risk, that you're going to meet a friend, you're going to do something. You don't have any second thoughts about the fact that this isn't going to work. You know that when you took that walk around the auditorium, you're going to meet somebody, right?
I was going to learn something interesting. I would meet somebody. I would also probably have coffee or lunch with the person who hired me, ensuring that they made a favorable note. And next time they had a conference, they'd call me. And it worked for me for years. And I still use things that I learned back then because I was working for people, by people who do what I do today. So a lot of my good ideas come from that. They come from being a news junkie. They come from knowing how to spin things to get the interest of the people on the other side of the news desk.
When you say spin, what sometimes people could think that is, comes from a negative, but what you're doing is you're framing it differently. Is that what you're basically doing?
You're really making it relatable.
Relatable. Okay.
It's one reason why we frequently use a certain month is Native American Heritage Month, or National Alzheimer's Awareness Month, or Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Those all allow us to share stories in that context that make it interesting for the press. Sometimes it's a real stretch. I heard one on the news this morning that I thought, really? Is someone took it that far? So it's always fine to really, really stretch in your pitch. I've had talk show hosts say, boy, that's really a stretch, Devin, but yeah, I'll book it.
So they trust you. They trust you. Huh?
Yes, because they know that our clients are going to be good spokespeople.
So you've helped the press learn how to take risks. Huh?
I never thought about it that way, but that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, you're helping them along. You're consulting with them that they're willing to take risks with you that they may not take with somebody else. So,
interesting.
A little bit about today. I mean, I know that you're really part of the world today because everything you're doing, you're involved with the news, all the news and media operations and newspapers, and you're right on top of things. Anything that you can tap into that would give the younger generation a little bit of a help, a little bit of assistance that you're giving in many ways. You're giving it the news guys, the news people, to take a risk and how to manage that risk and realize that, yeah, you're going to fall down every once in a while. I mean, what kind of wisdom would you impart? Because he seems to flow off of you very, very easily.
Oh, you're very kind, Mark. Thank you. I think sometimes today people are so adamant about their point of view that they lose their sense of humor. And I would suggest that it's important to maintain that sense of humor and to use it. And sometimes it's better to use that humor in a situation than it is to be harsh or argumentative. I'm thinking back to when I served on the governor's Small Business Advisory Council, and it was apparent to me that I was the token woman. And a small subset of the council met, 5 of us in Sacramento one day, flew up there early in the morning, went to the meeting. And as the meeting started, one of the men turned to me and said, Devin, why don't you take the notes? And I immediately stood up with a big smile and said, oh, why don't you take the notes? I'll get the coffee. How do you drink yours? And, what's he going to do? Going to take the notes.
Well, it was in those days, one of those was your job, right? So you took the better one. So
I chose the one I wanted.
That is a really good story. Then you've been listening to Ann and Devin talk about, some of their advice for the younger generation, and I didn't really pick that up with you as much as I would have liked. And so, you're out there with your mom. You're doing a podcast with your mom. You're out there doing some amazing things in the inspirational world. Can you tap into some of that would also tap into your history that would be good for some of the younger people in the world today?
Well, thank you. I would like to say what you were referring to, a podcast with my mother. She's 99 and a half. She has words of wisdom that she likes to give out. And when you take a look at someone's lifespan of almost 100 years, a century, I think it's really good for women in general to look back and as you mentioned before, learn who has come before them and what they've gone through, because it's, life is a building process. It's an evolution, as they say, as opposed to this is my way or the highway. And I do believe that in what did stood well for me throughout the years of working in the corporate life with mostly men. I believe that I had a larger vision of what we were all trying to do together. To achieve value, as you like to put it, Mark. What are we creating together? What value can we bring for my paycheck, for my family, for your paycheck, and a team, a company, a corporation, a family, a city, a nation, a world, to work together with a higher understanding that we are creating value together takes a sense of history. It takes a sense of belonging. And it's not just, your own slice of the pie at this particular moment, thinking that I love what you said, Devin, people's point of view seems to be all or nothing now. And I would say just growing up let's just all grow up a little bit and have, like you said, have some fun, bring some sense of humor, but also that historical perspective that, my goodness, my mother can bring some stories back in when she first was divorced and as a young, early, with 2 children, and could not have her own bank account, could not have, was unable to sit on the jury as a woman, so we have really progressed as women, and the history of our progression needs to be honored. And here we are. There's a lot more to do, more value to create, not just for women, but for all of the the diversity idea, the DEA that's so popular today, that point of view. I really think that we have so much more to learn from each other, and really truly work together to create greater value.
Let's go back to your mom in the podcast. What have you learned from her? I know that you're getting a depth of information. We're talking about your generation and now some of the present generation, and you're looking back to her generation. Yes. What are some of the things? Just a couple of things that hit you. I know that the fact that she couldn't go to the jury and she couldn't, have a checking account, and I don't know how anybody thought that was right, but what have you garnered from that?
What I've learned is that her generation, having gone through the Depression, World War II, quite a few of our current generation don't even have a sense of what they were fighting for. Right. The freedom of speech and all that we really hold dear as Americans are something that my mother holds dear. And right now, what she is holding dear is how can she age gracefully? And she has one piece of wisdom that I really love to share with everyone. And she says, let us all be kind to each other and create a softer joy, as we can age gracefully with a softer joy.
Oh, wow. Sort of like Devin's humor, being real and having a level of levity at the same time. It's similar. It's not the same, but it's
similar. And what I'm taking from that is that, instead of looking back at some of the horrors that did happen in a frame of 100 years, let's have a softer joy and work together.
It's important to not just work in the business, but you have to take time away from that and work on the business. If you're not planning for the future and where you're headed, you're never going to get there. And I think that's the ingredient.
Is that part of your ability to risk? And in other words, instead of scrambling every day to get everything out the door, you take the time to delegate to yourself the kinds of strategic and visionary things that you need to do?
Not necessarily every day, but definitely many days, yes. And just time to think. And what is happening in the world, and how is that going to impact our business, our clients, and where we're headed? Is all relevant. And if you don't know how you're getting from A to B, or how each of your clients needs to be doing that, you're not going to be really helpful to them.
Yeah, I always say we have to be at least a half a step ahead of our clients. If we're too far ahead of our clients, we lose them. But if we're maybe in our mind we would be, but that's
definitely in our mind, not necessarily expressed. But I want to go back to something that you and Agnes and I discussed over dinner, because I think in business too often, the ability to have a sense of humor and to be gentle is often lost. And it's so necessary, and especially today. And I know I shared a story with you back from, I think it was the early 80s, when I was serving on a state appointed government type board. And apparently I was the token woman. I had no problem with that designation. And I ended up on the executive committee. So when 5 of us met up in Sacramento one day, one of the guys turned to me and said, "Oh, Devin, why don't you take the notes?" And I just laughed and smiled and stood up and said, "Oh, why don't you take the notes? I'll get the coffee. What would you like in yours?" Who could object to the woman serving? And for me, that was far better than being the one.
You did it. And you did it with a smile, right?
Absolutely. A smile and a laugh and zero anger.
So going back to the humor. So for you, that was a humorous way to create a collaborative environment between the two of you. And he was satisfied and you were satisfied.
I don't know that he was so satisfied, but I was.
That probably is true, but maybe he was a better note taker. Who knows? One of the things that comes to my mind listening to you, Devin, is that, and I think I heard it from both Ann and Lynn too, but it jumped out at me, and that is that you're okay moving forward, achieving in steps. You know, something happens and maybe there was a little bit of a challenge, but you got from where you were to the next step, not to the 3 steps down the path that you might want, but I think the word was satisfied. I don't remember how you said it, but, you know, be satisfied with what you've been able to accomplish. And I know that Lynn has something to talk about that, but could you elaborate on that, or am I just wishful listening or wishful thinking or whatever?
Well, what I'm hearing is forward progress. And forward progress is still progress, even if you're not all the way there. And when you get there, odds are you're going to go further. Just stay the course.
And be satisfied with it. I mean, not say, "Oh, I wish I'd gotten this," or whatever, but, you know.
No, I think not necessarily satisfied, but be kind to yourself, compliment yourself, maybe even celebrate that partial victory on the way to a larger one.
Right.
I bet Lynn did a whole bunch of that.
Lynn, what about you? Can you tap into that?
Yeah, I would like to tap into that because, you know, as a student of charting in the stock market, one of the most instructive things to me is to look back in history and look at the trends, and as I just love to look at it on a piece of paper and all these little marks that show the different trends on a chart. Well, we can look back emotionally at the culture as it relates to women and our role in corporate life. And we can see such amazing leaps forward. Yes, there's been some pullbacks. Yes, there's been some retrenchments, some disappointments. But we don't let that just keep us. We are in a forward evolution of mankind that is, as you said, Mark, bent toward a creative process of making things better. So we are where we are, on right where we are, along that path. I can point back to, as Anne mentioned, her mother. Our mothers were really homemakers. That was their role. So I think the three of us were probably the first generation of really having an opportunity handed to us where we could be the first generation of women to rise into the corporate structure. And now many women get upset that there's not more people in the boardroom or in the C-suite that would represent the same denomination as in your staff, and so as if we all have to be represented perfectly. But we're on our way. So we're moving in the positive direction. So situation as it relates today, I think we've made huge progress. Does that mean that we all have to stamp our feet and demand what we want, when we want, as we want, and be treated, exactly with respect? Well, it's happening, and I think that there's a lot of people who feel they need to have a very, very strong and loud megaphone to make other people change. That may be true. It's not my style, but I do understand that whatever it takes, sometimes it might take a few, blow-ups now and then. But that's, again, all in the process of a longer evolution. So as we look forward into the future of what could be for women in the workplace, I see nothing but a greater future ahead. There's definitely going to be a time in the future when women probably will be the majority in the C-suite. More power to us at that point. But right here, right where we are right now, even though it might feel painful, there is a ripple effect that's happening that's going to be of a beneficial interest for all of us.
So one of the things, for the future, a tool is appreciating, not only what an individual has accomplished, but look back at what women have done in 50 years, What
women has done, and corporations have allowed that. I mean, where else but America have we had the opportunity to, as a Western woman, to create such wealth, not only for ourselves, but for corporations. We're at the vanguard. We're not only creators of wealth, we are consumers of wealth, right. Women. And so we have a larger and larger role to play, and responsibility comes with that role, as well as future vision of what is it the world that we want to leave for our children and our children's children. I certainly don't want a contentious world. I want one where everyone has an equal opportunity, and yet, we have an appreciation of the fact that we have the freedom to do so.
Well, thank you. It was, I don't know why I didn't really ever know this until about 20 years ago, but that, women at some point in time couldn't have a checkbook. Mm-hmm. they had to have their husband sign or their father, whatever. The father had to manage the money, or the husband had to manage the money. And that's, and today everybody's got 5 credit cards, so it's quite a bit of a shift.
That's a great analogy of it was my mother. She couldn't get her own checking account when she got divorced. She had to have her father sign for her. Women could not hold a seat in the courthouse, and you couldn't be a part of the what's it called, the panel that jury. Thank you. You couldn't have a seat in the jury. That was in the 50s, late 50s. 60s came on board. In my industry, I'll never forget Muriel Siebert, who was the first woman to get to own a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. And at the time, I think it was like 1967, she was one of 1,300 men. Up till then, no women. And, that was the beginning. There are breakthroughs everywhere. And even today we have new breakthroughs. So I love to honor those breakthroughs, not for in any sense of, how awful it must have been then, but rather how far we've come in a very short period of time. That's a half of a lifetime, at least for me, to see that. And I still have life ahead of me, and we'll see lots of great changes in the future for women.
Well, diversity and equity and inclusion are, that's the challenge as it relates back to the women. And the women have plowed quite a path for that, I can imagine. And, you probably know more about how we might look at some of the tools that the people of today could use. I mean, we've talked to Devin, and your comments about delegation, and my comment about looking around as to who's successful and learn from them. Is there something else that we could add? As Lynn says, the future. What's going to get us to that future that Lynn obviously has a great vision for? So.
Well, one of the things that has made a big difference for women has also been something called Title IX, where every school had to have sports for women as well, and had to have the same equipment and sports, believe it or not, are a wonderful vehicle to learn how to be effective in a team. So team building is the thing that I think is going to carry people forward. Because what you mentioned, Mark, was looking at someone doing something well. And too often people look around and say, well, why am I not being chosen? Why is it not me? And instead, why don't you say, why were they? What did they do? What can I learn from what they did and apply it to what I do? So I think I've said it to you too, Mark, before. Don't look at the hole, look at the donut. If you look at the hole gets bigger. If you look at the donut gets bigger. So look at the donut and see what they're doing right that got them that. When Lynn and I were talking, I told her how back in my corporate world, I suddenly was playing racquetball. I was hunting. I was doing all these sports because I was the only woman at the sea level, and that's what the guys did after work. And if I didn't learn how to play golf and racquetball, then I wasn't going to be a part of that social network that ended up translating to the work network. There were little things that happened in that environment that were important to the corporate. So I got my rifle and I went out hunting. I learned, and I didn't do badly, by the way. But you can't overlook the team element of these things, and building not just looking at your own career as an individual, but how can you use your career to help other women, to build your team, and your team help the company succeed. So taking forward a whole process instead of an individual process. Look at the whole instead of the donut. So, and I will say one little story I noticed about racquetball, by the way. When I played with women, we would play the first set and then we would stop and talk. And you lose your momentum and you kind of, your muscles start to cool off again. When you play with a man, you play the 3 sets until you figure out who wins and you talk at the end of the game. So we absolutely do things differently and we absolutely need to understand and recognize that, but we can work very well on a team.
Thank you. I love that team thing. And today, that's where diversity comes in. You have a diverse team. Lynn, Devin, I'm blinking out here a second. Devin, let's talk a little bit about, besides the challenges you had at that political event, what are some of the things that in your earlier years that looked like they were going to get in your way but didn't because of something you did? When we had dinner the other evening, you talked about having been an actress for a number of years, and your agent or your business managers would be working with you, and you took the opportunity to shift from what you were doing and not be dismayed by that. You were able to see it emotionally that this was a door that was opening that you could never imagine, but the door was opening, and I guess it's that risk factor you have, or.
Well, I also think that my managers saw something, a potential that I had not fully realized. I had always thought that when I was in high school and college studying journalism, I thought maybe one day I'll be a staff writer on a newspaper, or if I get really lucky, I might be a writer for a women's magazine. And what my managers saw was that I could represent one of their clients and do the PR and make them wildly successful. That's a whole other story. I ended up resigning that account after less than a month because I had the experience as actor going to be the next the next major motion picture star. He was supposed to star in a motorcycle movie. So I arranged for him to present the awards at a motorcycle race at Ascot.
Devin, let's wind up a little bit about what was accomplished with that motorcycle example.
So this major motion picture star who hasn't been heard from since, his managers and I spent the entire day at the motocross race. And just before the awards were due to be presented, and I had a TV station coming to cover him making that presentation, he decided he didn't feel well and had to go home. And he left his managers and I there holding the bag. And I thought, no, I'm not going to represent someone who, if he were on his knees and throwing up, maybe. But he was fine. He just panicked. So, my attitude was, you're an actor, fake it. Get through the presentation. And he went home. I fired.
Oh, you fired him. Okay.
I fired.
I'm with you, Devin. I'm with the fake it till you make it or motor through. Just get your motor going and keep motoring on at the motorcade. So I'm with you 100%.
All right, that's good. Anne, do you have a couple of those awkward moments where, it was sort of like the men and the women, or the men and one woman experience?
Yeah, I can remember at VF Corp, there was this. VF Corp owns Vanity Fair, Lee, Wrangler, JanSport. I mean, a ton of brands, every one of which was run by a man. But this one brand, Barbizon, that was run by me. And we had this huge corporate meeting, and everybody was there. And as I was walking to get my appetizer, I heard somebody say, "Did one of the guys bring his wife?" And I turned around and said, "No, he didn't."
They knew you were somebody to deal with, that's for sure. So I'm going to ask Devin and Lynn, and then Anne again. We've had a very nice conversation, and I think we've accomplished a great deal as it relates to some of the things that you guys have achieved, and the way you've been able to achieve it that could add value to the current world. So in a little bit of a summary, Devin, could you, what would you tell your younger self, who happens to be in today's world, what some words of wisdom as it relates to all the new things that are going on, the kinds of things that are getting in the way of everybody, not just women nowadays. They're getting in the way of, everybody.
A lot of what I would say probably comes a decade or two. Being strident doesn't help you. It doesn't help anybody. Be easy on yourself and other people. Maintain your sense of humor. And nothing is worth getting totally irate over. There's always another way to manage it. And just be smart enough and clever enough and resourceful enough to find other alternatives. There's always a way.
There's always a way to be kind, for instance.
Yes, that too.
Lynn, what about you? Talking to your younger self in today's world.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you, Devin, for that. That was just so impactful. And this has been a great discussion, and I thank you to Anne and Mark. This has just been so fun. I think that the spirit of gratitude would be one tool that I would invite myself as a younger person to hold on to. The fact that appreciation is an expansive, heart-centered place from which we can live our lives over, 10 decades. If we last to be 100, we're going to need appreciation and gratitude in all things. I appreciate opportunities that I both had and didn't have. They both taught me lessons today that I'm recognizing. So I would say to my younger self, pay attention to opportunities, evaluate them a little bit more, and find a mentor that can help you see in the future. Find what it is that you bring to the table, so to speak. In other words, what value can I bring such that every year that I apply my craft, that I'm going to create a future value that's worth something to be proud of today. So I would advise young people to really understand their value not only today, but how valuable they're going to be in the future to the corporation today, how valuable they're going to be in the future to their loved ones and families for having done well, and what value they can bring, hone their skills, and create, bring that creative process and believe in yourself that anything is possible. Take leaps. I mean, I took some extraordinary leaps looking back. I could have been creamed, easily.
Yeah. Having worked only 4 years in a big firm and going out on your own, that's quite a leap.
That was a huge leap, and it all worked out. So here's a big tool. What if it all works out? What would you love then? What would you do then?
Yeah, that's wonderful, Lynn. Thank you very much. Anne, you.
I think that I would have loved to have had both Devin and Lynn on any team I had. It would be a pleasure. And I think the only thing I can add to what they've so well said is to enjoy it, to just take a breath and enjoy the ride, enjoy what you're doing. And when I used to teach the wardrobing, where I said, dress for the job you want, not for the one you have. Why don't you work for the future that you want, not the one you have? So the forward thinking and the enjoyment of the journey. And what Devin was saying is so right. You can work hard. You don't have to work mean. And anytime anyone loses their temper, they lose the argument because no one can hear you anymore. So take all these words and enjoy yourself, your family, and enjoy the future that you're building, because it's all there for you to grab. It is the gold ring.
I was thinking about, I had forgotten about Revolutionary Conversations. But much of what you guys were talking about really do represent what RevCon talks about, Revolutionary Conversations. It talks about stopping and helping yourself or helping others, and spending time asking, creating a conversation with people together, a collaborative thing. And everything that you guys talked about, like if somebody's successful, you got to spend some time with them. You have to have that conversation. You can't just run up to them and say, what makes you so good? That's not gonna be polite or work particularly well. Devin was talking about taking risks. In other words, be able to take a risk and say, well, what can I do to help? What can I do? We've talked about stuff, but asking your boss, asking somebody you work with, what can I do can we do together? How can I help you? So wonderful. I actually have about 40 other questions for you all, but I don't want to keep you more than an hour and a half. So I'm going to ask James, all of you, Devin and Lynn have experienced the podcast before. And I always ask James to weigh in, both with questions as well as his own opinions or his own perceptions.
Thanks, Mark, and I'm honored to be given the opportunity, considering everybody who's here today. The thing that really struck me throughout this entire conversation is how fundamental a lot of the ideas that were presented often were presented as being historical, or given some historical context in terms of how far women have come, or how more diverse the opportunities are for people. But what really stuck out for me is that a lot of these things are so fundamental that they work really just as well today that they did, when these things were more of a more revolutionary. The shared tools and some of the fundamental communication techniques that Anne, Lynn, and Devin have talked about, seem universal to me. Like they're just never. And it reminded me of something my dad said, because he went to, he spent a lot of extra money and time putting himself into Harvard Business School. And he said that the Marines kind of taught him everything that he got out of Harvard. So, show up early or you're late, that kind of stuff, those core things. And I guess my question would be, has anything changed since, is this pandemic any different than the last one 100 years ago? Or, has stuff that's happening today, internet, pandemic, global warming, resource, management or mismanagement, whatever, has anything changed, any of those fundamental, obviously, the greater inclusion, but it's just greater inclusion, it seems like, in these paradigms. But the paradigms themselves are the same. The models are the same. Do you guys see any big changes that make any of the things you guys have talked about obsolete today or moving forward? That's a full stop.
Lynn? I'm going to ask Lynn, since I've started with her before.
Well, thank you, James. That's such a wonderful, sweeping philosophical question. I mean, I can, as a student of economic history, I can say that it's all different and yet it's all the same. History does repeat itself. I think people are human, after all. We have our foibles, we have our desires, we have our aspirations. And we definitely repeat the same problems over and over. Do we get better? I'm hoping. I have, I'm an eternal optimist, so I believe that things are getting better. And that indeed this time, this pandemic, this crisis, sincerely, we are making progress. Even in this, even though it may appear, the appearance of things may be worse, what if we're actually getting even more creative in problem solving? Problems may be becoming bigger, certainly more dire as it relates to resources and the planet. But I do believe that the human spirit is invincible and that we'll come up with solutions. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm going to jump to Devin.
I think the old parable of as much as things change, they stay the same is really, really appropriate. The problems become a little bit different. The solutions become a little bit different, but nothing really is that much different. And Mark, I just have to compliment you on bringing together a group of people that I would really like to spend time with outside of this podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I haven't seen Ann in years, and I don't think I've ever met Lynn. So I don't think we've ever been in the same room together. So when we just a sidebar, and you guys can cut this out, but when we did the first podcast, which was Devin's, Mary Agnes got so excited. My wife got so excited about Devin that I think it was the 15th, and Devin's birthday was the 16th, and she was determined that we get Devin to take her to dinner, and we didn't happen, and it was probably didn't happen because of me. But this month we all got together, and
it happened a year later.
A year later, yeah. So Mary Agnes made that happen. She was not going to let Devin escape one more time. So anyway, but for the same reason, she really wanted to hang out with Devin. So, and I got the opportunity to be with them and whatever. Ann, what about you?
Yeah, good question, James. My pivot, my point on this is that, as the other women on the podcast have said, that the tools remain the same, but the names change. And so it was affirmative action. Now it's DEI. What I've seen with the Me Too movement is that women are now credible. And that's a nice movement forward. Now we have to make sure that that pendulum doesn't swing too far one way or the other. The one big thing I take away is that technology did not give us more time. We kept thinking, we'll get this technology, it'll free us. I don't know about anyone else, but that has not changed. I have not seen the technology giving me more time, but I'm taking more time. That's changed. So the tools, they're pretty basic and they're pretty good for you, but they might just call it something different. That's me. I think now we've got Mark frozen.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Hopefully I'm recording.
Now you are.
Okay. I was listening to all three of you and James as well. And a lot of it does stay the same. I think some of the nuances do change a bit. I think that we've grown a lot more sophisticated, and I'm thinking that if we are going to change to save some of the things that we've got precious in our world, is that we got to use that sophistication in a way that's more collaborative and more inclusive. You know, I remember when my late partner Gloria Axelrod was alive, when we were teaching revolutionary conversation at clients, and helping them understand that everybody belonged and increase the capability of the company, because they all began to realize that they belong together. You didn't need to fire this one, you didn't need to fire that one, whatever. You just need to talk to each other. And I think we need to, if anything, change our habit. In other words, these are very good tools that you've all talked about, but we need to apply them more than we probably have done before. And I think a lot of that has disappeared. I mean, you know, we all worked in college, right? I would assume that all of us worked in college, and a lot of people don't in today's world. They don't have they don't have a job. They've never experienced talking to customers or clients or serving tea, or, you know, they've not had to get a paycheck. And I think that that's hard for them when they all of a sudden sit at a desk and haven't had to struggle like Lynn did. But Lynn didn't struggle. She took it in stride. You know, she's out selling whatever she could sell. And I don't think a bit of that, I don't think that tool, that experience is missing a good, you know, I don't know how we get it. I don't know how we include it into the process. So, any comments about that? And then we'll break.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying, because I notice with that customer service maybe has lost a little of its glow. It appears that the customer is not always right, and that people are often trying to teach you how to be a good customer instead of making you a happy customer. So I think with what you're talking about is fewer people having to work themselves would have a greater appreciation for the customer and the work ethic that it takes to serve the customer well. And we all are customers. And so I think that could use a little polishing.
I agree. Devin, you said something?
No, I was just I'm humming a lot because Anne was right on target.
Lynn, anything that you think of?
I would like to just add, anyway, I love what you just said, Anne, that we're all customers. Well, that is really quite an interesting idea. But I want to underscore what you just said, Mark, about using the tools in such a way that we talk to each other more. And that the art of conversation and even dialogue and debate seems to be under a lot of us either stress or maybe, disrepair at the moment in our country. And the divisions that arise, I think, can be solved more easily by the revolutionary conversations that you stand for, Mark. And that, we have to stand for something, and let us all, maybe resolve to do a little better, to communicate with each other so that resolution can come sooner rather than later, and open a greater space for something new to happen, something better, the creative process.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying about the division, and instead of conversation, we have debate, or we have lines in the sand. They're so easy to create the lines in the sand. It's like James was saying, that these are all fundamental, but if they can't get to the table, these fundamental talents can't get to the table because we're not articulating or collaborating with the person across the table with you. Those tools are, in some ways, I won't say worthless, but they're unapplied, unproductive. And so anyway, thank you all. This was fun. So when are we going to have an annual retreat someplace good? Maybe in northern Florida.
Yes. Right. We'll all show up in Nashville.
Nothing else going on here, so.
Devin, thank you very much. Thanks for going out to dinner with us the other day. I know Mary Agnes is still talking about you. So.
Oh dear.
And Lynn, thanks again. You surprised me so much with that. When you did the interview with Barbara Gaughan-Mueller at Run Revolutionary Conversations, and you're the only person to show up on any of those interviews and having read the book and talk about the book as you did in the beginning. You're wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I so appreciate it. And thanks for everyone else, Anne and Devin and James.
Thank you.
Anne?
Thanks, everybody. It was wonderful. My pleasure. I just wanted to say to all of you that labels really are terrible things, because we're labeled as a minority. And I saw nothing minor from either of you.